My son wasn't supposed to call me on a Wednesday morning. He knew I kept Wednesdays clear for paperwork, always had, ever since he was small enough to sit under my desk and play with a stapler while I worked. So when his name came up on my phone at 9:47 a.m., I didn't answer with hello. I answered with, "What's wrong?" He said, "Dad." Just that. Just my name for me. I set down my coffee. "Talk to me," I said. He told me he was at Riverside Park, the one near the bridge on Elm Fork, where we used to take him fishing when he was 7. He said he had his son with him, my grandson, Liam, 4 years old, and probably wondering why Daddy looked the way he sounded. "Why aren't you at work?" I asked. He said I got fired. I didn't say anything. "Dad, he called me into his office this morning and he said..." He stopped. Started again. He said our family wasn't the kind of people Whitmore Capital does business with. He said it like that, our kind. Then he handed me a box. "Where's Liam now?" "Right next to me. He's got his juice cup." "Okay," I said. "Stay there." I grabbed my jacket off the back of the chair. Didn't tell my assistant where I was going. Just walked out through the side entrance and got in my truck and drove the 22 minutes to Riverside Park without turning on the radio once. I saw them on the second bench from the parking lot. My son, he goes by Wade, always has, even though his given name is Edward after my father, was sitting with his back straight the way I taught him, but his hands were pressed flat on his knees like he was trying to hold himself down. Liam was on his lap, drinking from a blue dinosaur cup, watching the pigeons. 2 bags sat on the ground beside the bench. 2 bags. I stood there for a second before I walked over. Took that in. He looked up when he heard my footsteps on the gravel, and I saw something in his face that I hadn't seen since he was maybe 9 years old. That look where he was trying very hard not to need me. Trying to be fine. Failing at it. I sat down next to him. Liam said, "Pop, pop," and reached for me with one arm, still holding the juice cup with the other, efficient as always. I took him and settled him against my side. "Tell me all of it," I said to Wade. He told me. Took about 10 minutes. His father-in-law, a man named Douglas Whitmore, which tells you something about a man right there, that he named a company after himself, had hired Wade 3 years ago, right around the time Wade married his daughter Celeste. At the time, it seemed like an opportunity. Wade had a finance degree from UT Dallas, good instincts, worked hard. I didn't love the arrangement, but I understood it. A young man wants to build something with his wife's family. That's not weakness. That's hope. But Douglas Whitmore was not a man who hired family because he believed in them. He hired family because family was easier to control. For 3 years, Wade did everything that man asked. Worked late, skipped holidays, missed 2 of Liam's birthday parties because Whitmore called emergency board meetings that weren't emergencies. Drove numbers on 3 different portfolios that Whitmore took full credit for at the quarterly dinners I wasn't invited to. And this Wednesday morning in October, Douglas Whitmore had called my son into his corner office on the 14th floor of a glass building in downtown Fort Worth and told him, with the door closed and HR sitting right there, that Whitmore Capital was refocusing its family culture and that Wade's background and lineage didn't align with where the firm was headed. Lineage. The man used the word lineage, Wade said. He told me, and I'm not making this up, Dad, he said, "No offense to your father, but men who work with their hands don't build the kind of legacy that belongs in this boardroom." He said that, word for word. I looked at the river. There's a particular kind of anger that doesn't make noise. I've had it twice in my life before that morning. Once when a contractor tried to cheat me out of $40,000 on my first big job. Once when my wife, God rest her, got a diagnosis and the doctor delivered it like he was reading off a grocery list. It's quiet. It sits behind your sternum. It doesn't rush. I said, "What did Celeste say?" Wade was quiet for a moment. "She said she needed time." I nodded. She didn't argue with him. She left the room when he started talking. I kept nodding. "File that away." "Okay," I said. "Okay." Wade looked at me. "You're going to follow me. I want to show you something." "Dad, I've got Liam. Where are we going?" "You'll see." He looked at me like I used to look at my own father when I couldn't tell if he was being calm because everything was fine or because nothing was hand. He just didn't want me to panic. I knew that look well. I'd worn it myself. Trust me, I said. He got Liam buckled into the car seat in his car. I pulled out of the lot and he followed me. I need to back up. My name is Roy. Roy Hester. I'm 61 years old. I have 2 artificial knees, a decent handicap at golf, and a standing Thursday lunch at a diner on Camp Bowie that I've kept for 19 years. Douglas Whitmore called me a man who works with his hands. He was not wrong. I started in commercial construction when I was 23 years old, not managing it, not financing it. I was on the crew. Poured concrete, framed walls, learned to read a blueprint by reading it wrong first and then right. I worked for other people for 6 years, and then I stopped. In 1990, I started Hester Site Development out of a single wide trailer on a lease lot in Weatherford, Texas. Myself, 1 excavator, a dump truck with a transmission that slipped in reverse, and a phone that I answered every time it rang, regardless of the hour. I didn't talk about it much, not because I was hiding it, but because I was raised in a family where you didn't count what you had until you knew it was actually yours. My father worked in a mill for 34 years and never once complained about it. He also never bragged about the 8 acres he paid off quietly or the savings account he left my mother. Some people show their cards, some people don't. I don't. By 1998, Hester Site Development was doing $4 million a year. By 2005, we were at $22 million, and I'd brought in 2 partners, both of whom I'd since bought out quietly and without drama. We rebranded in 2009, long story involving a trademark dispute with a company in Louisiana, and became what we are now. Meridian Development Group, 31 years of early mornings. Bid sheets and site surveys. Crews I trusted and a few I had to let go. Winters when I wasn't sure if I'd make payroll, and summers when the work came in faster than I could staff it. A wife who kept the books for the first 12 years and never once made me feel small for not knowing what she knew about accounting. Meridian does about $90 million annually now. Industrial and commercial site development across Texas, Oklahoma, and into New Mexico. We don't advertise much. In our industry, you don't need to if you're good. The phone rings because someone you built something for told someone else. I don't have my name on a building. I don't have my name on the company anymore. Technically, we restructured in 2017 for tax purposes. Douglas Whitmore had no idea who I was. That happened to me sometimes. I drove a 19 F-250 that I'd had repainted because I liked the original color better. I wore a jacket from Duluth Trading that I'd had for 6 years. I did not wear a watch that announced itself. When Whitmore met me at Wade and Celeste's engagement party 3 years ago, he looked at me for about 90 seconds, asked me what I did, heard construction, and turned back to his own conversation. That was fine. I let Wade follow me all the way down I-30 to the Wrigley corridor, then off the exit and through a series of streets he probably hadn't been on before. I watched him in my rearview mirror. He was on the phone, probably talking to Celeste, or trying to. We pulled into the parking structure of a building on Hewlin. 8 stories, glass and steel. The kind of building that doesn't announce itself either. I parked on the 2nd level. Wade pulled in beside me, got Liam out of the car seat. Liam was asleep. Wade shifted him against his shoulder, held him there with one arm, and looked at me over the boy's dark hair. "What is this place?" "Come inside," I said. The lobby was quiet. Slate floors, a reception desk where a young woman named Priya, who has worked for us for 4 years and knows everything, looked up and said, "Good morning, Mr. Hester," and handed me a message slip without missing a beat. Wade stopped walking. I turned around. He was looking at Priya, then at the wall behind her where the company name was mounted in brushed steel letters 6 inches tall. Meridian Development Group. Then he looked at me. I said, "Come on, my office is on 6. He didn't say anything in the elevator. Liam slept on his shoulder the whole ride up. When the doors opened on 6, Margaret, my actual assistant, who's been with me for 14 years and who sent me a text when I left without telling her where I was going that simply said everything okay, stood up from her desk and took one look at Wade's face and said, "I'll get coffee," and disappeared. I showed Wade my office. He walked in slowly, set Liam down on the small sofa in the corner, the one I keep there because my grandkids visit sometimes, and covered him with the blanket that lives on the armrest. Then he turned around and looked at the room, the awards on the wall, the project photos, the framed aerial of the Meridian Distribution Center in Midland that we built in 2019, which is, if I'm being honest, one of the things I'm most proud of in my professional life. Then he looked at me. "Dad, sit down," I said. We sat across from each other at the small table by the window. Margaret brought coffee. Outside, Fort Worth went about its morning. I told him. All of it. The full version. Not because I'd been hiding it from him, but because he'd never asked, and I'd never wanted him to take a path because of what I had. I wanted him to build his own thing first. I wanted to know what he was made of before he knew what I was made of. I think I'd learned that from my own father. Wade held his coffee cup and didn't drink it and listened. When I finished, he said, "Whitmore Capital." "Yes. He's Dad, Whitmore Capital manages one of our pension accounts." He said it slowly, like he was doing the math out loud. "I know," I said. "You knew. Not when you first went to work there. I found out about 8 months in. Ran the numbers. They manage a pooled fund that includes 3 of our subcontractors. Indirect relationship, not direct." But still, he looked out the window. "So when he called our family, he didn't know," I said. "That's the thing. He genuinely didn't know." Wade looked back at me. He had his mother's eyes, dark brown, very steady, and right now they were doing something I recognized. Sorting, organizing, getting the shape of a situation before deciding how to feel about it. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "I've got a call at 2 o'clock, I said. "I want you in the room." The 2 o'clock call was not an accident. I want to be honest about that. I had been in a position for about 6 months where Whitmore Capital's relationship with the pooled fund had been something I was already reconsidering, not because of Wade. At that point things were still fine on the surface, but because I'd heard some things through people I trust about how Whitmore managed partnerships, and I didn't love what I'd heard. When Wade called me that morning, I already had a meeting scheduled with my CFO and our legal team about restructuring how we handled that particular account relationship. It was already on the calendar. All I did was add one more name to the attendee list. At 1:45, 3 people came into the conference room on 6. My CFO, Wendell, our outside legal counsel, whose name I'll leave out because he likes his privacy, and a man named Barrett who ran the institutional investment side of things for us, and who had been waiting for me to make a call on this for weeks. Wade sat in the chair to my right. Liam was still on the sofa in my office down the hall, still asleep, with Margaret checking on him every 20 minutes. At 2004, the video call connected. Douglas Whitmore joined from what looked like his office on the 14th floor. The same floor where he'd handed my son a box that morning. He had his own CFO with him and a woman I didn't recognize who was probably legal. He looked at the screen for a moment. He saw me. He saw me. I watched something move across his face, just briefly, the way a man's expression shifts when he's doing arithmetic and the answer isn't what he expected. I said, "Good afternoon, Douglas. Thank you for making time." "Roy." He said my name carefully. Yes. Of course. I wasn't aware this was. "I believe you know my son," I said. He looked at Wade. Wade looked back at him with his mother's steady eyes and didn't say a word. There may be a miscommunication this morning about." Whitmore started. "No miscommunication," I said. "Wade told me exactly what happened. I believe him." Whitmore sat back slightly in his chair. Wendell walked the group through the restructuring proposal. It was clean and professional and did not raise its voice once. The language was simple. Meridian Development Group would be withdrawing from the pooled fund arrangement and moving that account to a different institutional manager. Effective end of quarter. All contracts would be honored through the transition period. No drama. But the numbers were what they were. Whitmore's stake in that pooled fund, and by extension the management fees his firm earned off accounts like ours, amounted to a not small piece of his quarterly revenue. Barrett had run the analysis. When you pulled Meridian and accounted for the downstream effect on 2 of the other accounts that tended to follow our lead on these decisions, You were looking at close to $4.3 million in annual managed assets walking out the door. I didn't say that number out loud. I didn't need to. Whitmore was a finance man. He could do that math in his head in about 4 seconds. I watched him do it. "Roy," he said, and his voice had changed. "I think there's been a misunderstanding about the situation with Edward this morning. I want to be clear that it was a business decision and not. His name is Wade," I said. "He goes by Wade." Whitmore stopped. "And I understand it was a business decision," I said. "I'm making one too." There was a silence on the call that lasted maybe 5 seconds. In a business call, 5 seconds is a long time. His CFO leaned over and said something to him quietly. Whitmore said, "Is there any flexibility on the timeline?" "End of quarter," I said. "That's fair to everyone." He nodded slowly. He looked at the table in front of him. He looked like a man who had decided that morning that he knew exactly who mattered and who didn't, and was now sitting with the cost of that decision. I didn't feel triumphant. I want to say that clearly because I've thought about it many times since. I didn't feel good. I didn't feel like I'd won something. I felt the way I feel when I have to let a long-term subcontractor go because they've stopped doing the work correctly. A kind of tired sadness, and underneath it, the quiet certainty that it was the right call. I said, "Douglas, one more thing." He looked up. "My son worked for you for 3 years. He was good at his job. Whatever you told yourself this morning about bloodlines and legacy, I'd encourage you to sit with that. Not for my sake, for yours." I ended the call. The room was quiet for a moment. Wendell gathered his folders. Barrett nodded at me once in the way that people do when they're too professional to say anything but want you to know they think you handled it right. Legal counsel typed something on his laptop. Wade was looking out the window at the city. He said quietly, "You didn't have to do that." "I know," I said. I could have found another job. I would have been fine. I know that too. So why? I thought about how to answer that. I thought about my father, who worked in a mill for 34 years and never told anyone about the 8 acres or the savings account. I thought about my wife, who kept books for a company she'd helped build without ever needing a nameplate on the door. I thought about the years I spent on job sites before anyone knew my name and how none of that time felt wasted, because the point was never for anyone to know. I said, because he looked at you, at us, and made a judgment, and he deserved to know he was wrong, not for his humiliation, just so he'd know. Wade was quiet. Then he said, "I've been thinking about what I want to do next. Yeah, I don't want to go back into institutional finance." He said it plainly, the way he used to tell me things when he was a kid, just stating the fact, not asking for permission. "I think I want to build something." I felt something move in my chest. I didn't say anything. "I don't know what yet," he said. "I'm not asking you for. I'm not saying I want to work for Meridian. I just mean—" "I know what you mean," I said. Down the hall I could hear Liam waking up. That particular sound he makes, not quite crying, not quite talking, just announcing himself to whatever room he's in. Margaret's voice, patient and warm, answering him. Wade stood up. "I should get him. Go ahead." He walked to the door. Stopped. "Dad." "Yeah." "Did you always know it would end up like this? With Whitmore, I mean." I thought about it honestly. "No," I said. "I knew something wasn't right with how he ran partnerships. I didn't know this morning was going to happen. But when it did," I paused. "I already had the meeting on the calendar." Wade looked at me for a moment. Something in his face settled. "I'll call Celeste tonight," he said. "Okay. We're going to be okay. I think." "I think so too," I said. "You raised your son right today." He didn't see his father fall apart. He saw his father make a phone call. Wade nodded once. Then he went down the hall to get Liam. I sat in the conference room for a few minutes after everyone had cleared out. The afternoon sun was coming through the west-facing windows, and the city was the same as it always is, moving, working, indifferent and alive. 31 years. That's a long time to build something quietly. I used to wonder sometimes if I'd done my son a disservice, not telling him sooner, not showing him earlier what we had. But I think I really believe this, that it would have changed him. When you know the net is there, you jump differently. You take risks you take anyway. You don't find out what you're made of. He needed to find that out for himself first. He'd been finding it out for 3 years in that glass building on the 14th floor, doing good work for a man who'd already decided what he was worth before he ever opened a spreadsheet. And Douglas Whitmore. I harbor no real grudge. He was a man who had spent his life sorting people into categories and had simply miscategorized once. He would go on. His firm would take a hit and adjust. He'd probably be more careful about what he said in HR-supervised meetings. Whether he'd learn anything real, I couldn't say. That wasn't really my concern. My concern was the boy coming down the hall toward me right now with Liam on his hip. The child's face still creased from the sofa cushion, reaching toward me with his arms already out. I took him. This was our bloodline, messy and tired and still half asleep in the middle of the afternoon, reaching for the people it trusted. I'd put in 31 years so this moment could be this ordinary. That was enough. I've been sitting with this story for a while now, turning it over the way you turn a worn tool in your hands, not because you need to use it, but because the weight of it still means something. Douglas Whitmore looked at my son and made a decision about him in about 90 seconds. That's how long it took him to hear the word construction and move on. He thought he was reading a situation clearly. He thought he understood what kind of man my son came from. And in a way, I understand that instinct. We all make judgments quickly. The problem isn't the speed. The problem is when you stop being curious, when you're so certain of what you know that you stop asking what you might be missing. What I've learned, and I didn't learn it quickly. It took me 31 years and 2 bad knees and more sleepless midnights than I can count, is that the people who confuse surface for substance usually end up surprised eventually. Not because the universe is handing out justice, just because reality doesn't hold still long enough for assumptions to stay true forever. Wade did the right thing that morning, not the easy thing. He sat in a park with his son and called me instead of calling a lawyer or going back up to the 14th floor and saying things he couldn't unsay. That took something. That took the kind of character you don't build in a weekend. The willingness to absorb a bad thing without immediately becoming a bad thing yourself. I raised him to understand that how you respond to humiliation tells people more about you than the humiliation itself ever could. And the intelligence piece. I don't mean book smart, though Wade is that too. I mean the ability to read a situation without letting your ego do the reading for you. When I told him about Meridian, he didn't get defensive that I hadn't told him sooner. He didn't make it about himself. He sat there and thought about what it meant, and the first thing he said was, Whitmore Capital manages one of our pension accounts. He was already thinking strategically, already connecting the dots. That's a kind of intelligence that either gets developed young or not at all, and it gets developed by being handed real problems and trusted to work through them. The hardest part of raising a son is knowing when to let the weight sit on his shoulders instead of yours. I held back what I had for years, not because I was playing games, but because I needed to know who he was before he knew what I was. I needed to know he could stand up under his own weight. He could. What Liam saw that day, even at 4 years old, even half asleep against his father's shoulder, was a grandfather who showed up. A father who didn't fall apart. 2 men who walked into a building quietly and handled something the way it deserved to be handled. No scene, no cruelty, just the steady work of making things right. That's what I hope stays with him. Not the money, not the name on the wall. The steadiness, the belief that who you are accumulates over time and that it's always accumulating whether anyone's watching or not. I drove home that evening with the windows down. Fort Worth in October. The air smelled like cut grass and something faintly like rain. 31 years. I'd do it the same way again.